Welcome to the FAA's virtual public workshop on the draft environmental assessment for the South Central Florida Metroplex. I'm Michael O'Hara, Regional Administrator for the FAA Southern Region. Florida is the only state in the country with 4 major international airports: Miami, Fort Lauderdale, Hollywood, Orlando, and Tampa. Palm Beach and St. Pete Clearwater International are also important airports in the national airspace system. In addition, Florida has a significant number of general aviation airports. You get the picture. Florida is one of the busiest states for aviation in the United States. The South Central Florida Metroplex is the FAA's plan to modernize air traffic procedures for 21 airports in the southern half of Florida. Many of the existing procedures are based on outdated technology. While safe, these procedures are less precise and efficient than those based on satellite technology. The satellite-based routes proposed for the Metroplex project will enhance safety and efficiency across the region. Metroplex will benefit passengers by creating more direct routes, decrease congestion at airports and in the air, improve air traffic flows, enhancing safety and efficiency, and reduce complexity and communication for air traffic controllers and pilots, making the system safer. Before we can change procedures, the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA, requires us to conduct an environmental assessment to determine the potential impacts of the proposed procedures. One purpose of NEPA is to ensure that proposals, alternatives, and environmental impacts of projects are fully disclosed to the public. That's why we're here today. On May 11th, the FAA posted the Draft Environmental Assessment, or EA, for the Metroplex, and we opened a 60-day public comment period that closes on July 10th. We hope that you will consider submitting comments about the document. On this website, you can click the Comments tab, and it will show you how to submit your comments. It provides email addresses and a physical address where you can send comments after the workshop. Be sure to get your comments in before the July 10th deadline. After the comment period closes, we will review and consider all substantive comments received during the comment period as we develop the environmental determination. We expect to issue the determination by September 30th, 2020. A note about the draft EA. The FAA identified inadvertent errors related to runway designations for Orlando, Tampa, and St. Pete Clearwater International airports. We updated the document on May 13th, and it's posted at metroplexenvironmental.com. I'd like to cover 3 procedural items before we start. First, if you're having technical issues, you can text us anytime during the workshop at 949-478-0253 or click the Technical Support tab on this webpage. Second, the workshop will last 90 minutes. We are recording the workshop and it will be posted on this website tomorrow for you to review. You can share the link with friends and neighbors who are unable to participate today. And finally, we have experts available to answer questions about the draft EA and the proposed air traffic control procedures. FAA air traffic controllers, environmental specialists, and industry representatives will answer your questions after the presentation. As a reminder, the questions asked and answers provided here are not part of the official record for the draft EA. To comment for the official record, click on the Comments tab on this website. That will link you to the FAA's official comment page for this project. Now, Lisa Favors, an environmental specialist for the FAA's Air Traffic Organization, will brief us on the draft environmental assessment.
Thank you, Michael. I will explain the draft EA for the South Central Florida Metroplex. As mentioned earlier, we developed the document in accordance with NEPA, which requires us first to identify the purpose and need for the project. In this case, the purpose and need addresses the current inefficient arrival and departure procedures for airports in South Central Florida. Many of the existing procedures are based on outdated technology and are less precise and efficient than satellite procedures. We need to fix that. The draft EA identifies causes for inefficiency as lack of predictable routes or procedures to transition aircraft between airport runways and high altitude en route airspace. Complex interactions between converging routes and lack of flexibility for air traffic controllers as they transition flights between high altitude and low altitude airspace. By adopting new procedures, which the draft EA calls the proposed action, we expect reduced workload due to fewer controller-pilot communications, more efficient operations due to decreased complexity, and fewer flight segments resulting in more predictable traffic flows. A detailed explanation of the purpose and need is included in Chapter 2 of the draft EA. The draft EA analyzes potential environmental impacts from the proposed action and the no action alternative. It is important to note that we analyzed many additional procedures, but they not carried forward for detailed study in the draft EA because they did not meet the purpose and need or applicable safety standards. Under no action, procedures in place from June 2017 to May 2018 would remain except for planned modifications that are independent of the Metroplex. Our analysis determined that only the proposed action would meet the purpose and need for the project. The no action alternative would not meet the purpose and need, but it was included in the draft EA as required by Council on Environmental Quality Regulations. The alternatives are described in Chapter 3 of the draft EA. Affected environment describes the human, physical, and natural environmental conditions that the proposed action could affect. The affected environment is described in detail in Chapter 4 of the draft EA. The draft EA considers the effects on 14 environmental resource categories and their subcategories identified in FAA guidance. We evaluated the alternatives under conditions forecasted for 2021, the first year the proposed action could be implemented, and under the 2026 forecasted conditions. The evaluation considers the direct, indirect, and cumulative effects of the proposed action and no action alternatives. The draft EA determined that neither the proposed action nor the no action alternatives are likely to cause significant environmental impacts to any of the environmental resource categories. For more information, you can review Chapter 5 in the draft EA. The rest of my discussion will focus on the noise analysis, since you, the public, expressed most interest in that. However, feel free to ask questions about any category during the Q&A session later in the workshop. First, I will explain how we measure noise. The FAA measures aviation noise using the Day-Night Average Sound Level, DNL, metric. DNL represents noise as it occurs over a 24-hour period, with nighttime noise weighted more heavily than daytime noise. DNL is the standard noise metric used for studies of aviation noise exposure in communities. To account for differences in how people respond to noise, we use the A-weighted scale, DBA. This scale closely approximates the volume of sound as perceived by the human ear. The FAA considers aircraft noise exposure of 65 dNL in residential areas and noise increases of dNL 1.5 dB or more for noise-sensitive areas exposed to noise at or above the dNL 65 dB noise exposure level to be significant. The noise analysis demonstrates that the proposed action would not result in significant noise increases. More information about how the FAA measures noise is in Appendix E of the draft EA, and a detailed noise analysis can be found in Appendix I. Before I end, the following video will show you how to look up noise information for your address. You may search more than 122,000 grid points of noise data in the study area, presented in decibels, abbreviated as dB. The grid points are U.S. Census population points located at 1/2 nautical mile intervals across the entire study area. The map opens to the study area. In the search bar, start typing your address and similar addresses will pop up. Click on the correct address and you will see a light blue map pin. The map shows the model grid points in blue. Click on each point to see a pop-up with noise analysis results. The map shows data including DNL calculated for the alternatives and the change in noise when the proposed action is compared to the no action alternative. Now our air traffic control expert will brief you on some of the more significant procedures the Metroplex proposes for your area.
Hello, my name is Scott, and I'm an air traffic controller who works at the FAA's Central Florida Terminal Radar Approach Control, known as TRACON, which manages air traffic for Orlando International and Orlando Executive Airports. In this video, we will walk you through the flight procedure poster boards for Orlando International Airport and Orlando Executive Airport. Each of the following boards shows a sampling of existing flight tracks and the proposed new flight procedures for jet aircraft. Each board will show either arrival or departure aircraft with current day tracks color-coded via altitude. The flight tracks and proposed procedures are all overlaid on a map of the surrounding area. Each flight procedure board is oriented with north facing up. The name of the airport and the names of the flight procedures are in the box on the upper right corner. This box also shows the type of operation, either arrival or departure, and the direction of flight, which we call flow, either north, south, east, or west. Flow is related to the layout of the airport's runways. For example, at Orlando International Airport, there are 4 parallel runways oriented north-south. These runways allow aircraft to land and depart to the north or the south, depending on the direction of the wind and other operational factors. A few acronyms are used in the boards. A standard instrument departure, or SID, is a departure. A standard terminal arrival, or STAR, is an arrival. Area navigation, or RNAV, is the term for modern satellite-based navigation technology used in the proposed procedures. The spelling of each arrival or departure procedure is limited to 5 letters. For example, the spelling of the SNFLD arrival is pronounced Seinfeld. The stars on the board are locations of waypoints, which are fixed navigational points in space that the aircraft fly to. Just as with the spelling of procedures, waypoints are spelled with 5 letters. For example, the PTMAN waypoint would be pronounced Pittman. The proposed flight procedures are colored purple for departures and orange for arrivals. These colored paths show the proposed routes in the future for most flights using the new procedures. Surrounding the paths are dispersed path areas in either pink for departures or yellow for arrivals. These areas show the possible locations where aircraft may fly in the future and account for the possibility of different routing to avoid hazardous weather, for operational need, or for safety. The existing flight tracks are shown on the legend by color, starting from the lowest altitudes in pink, then blue, then teal, and finally the highest altitudes are in green. The flight tracks shown are a sample of jet aircraft operations which occurred from April to May 2018 during the daytime, which does not include nighttime hours between 11 p.m. and 6 a.m. The bullet points on the right side provide additional details about the procedures. Next, we'll take a look at a few arrival and departure boards for these airports. This flight procedure board shows Orlando International Airport north flow departures with 7 proposed departure procedures: the Danny, Epcot, Faith, Fishin, Jimmy, Leeward, and Missoula. As you can see, the proposed procedures mimic current day flight tracks airplanes fly today. Generally, aircraft with destinations to the north use the Jimmy and Faith departures. Aircraft with destinations to the east use the Missoula and Danny departures. Destinations to the west use the Epcot and Leeward departures, and destinations to the south use Fishin. Note that when the Palatka Military Operating Area is not in use north of Orlando, departures may be routed directly to the Mickey Waypoint. This waypoint is located farther north and is not shown on the graphic. This flight procedure board shows Orlando International Airport south flow departures with 7 proposed departure procedures: the Danny, Epcot, Faith, Fishin, Jimmy, Leeward, and Missoula. As you can see, the proposed procedures mimic current day flight tracks airplanes fly today. Generally, aircraft with destinations to the north use the Jimmy and Faith departures. Aircraft with destinations to the east use the Missoula and Danny departures. Destinations to the west use the Epcot and Leeward departures. And destinations to the south use the Fishin departure. Note that when the Palatka Military Operating Area is not in use north of Orlando, departures may be routed directly to the Mickey Waypoint. This waypoint is located farther north and is not shown on the graphic.
Hello, my name is Bob, and I'm an air traffic controller who works at the FAA Central Florida Terminal Radar Approach Control, known as TRACON, which manages air traffic for Orlando International and Orlando Executive Airports. This flight procedure board shows the Orlando International Airport north flow arrivals and proposed arrival procedures: the Alina, Grinch, Jafar, Jokers, Pricey, Rides, and Seinfeld. As you can see, the proposed procedures mimic current day flight tracks airplanes fly today. Aircraft arriving from the northeast use the Seinfeld and Alina arrival procedures, and aircraft from the northwest use the Grinch and Jafar arrival procedures. Aircraft from the southwest use the Pricey and Jokers arrivals, and aircraft from the southeast use the Rides arrival procedure. Arrival aircraft typically will fly along the same paths and at similar altitudes as they do today. For example, the procedures coming from the northeast will allow air traffic controllers to blend the Seinfeld arrivals with the Alina arrivals to create a separated single stream of traffic to the runway for landing. This flight procedure board shows the Orlando International Airport's south flow arrivals and 7 proposed arrival procedures: the Alina, Grinch, Jafar, Jokers, Pricey, Rides, and Seinfeld. As you can see, the proposed procedures mimic current day flight tracks airplanes fly today. Aircraft arriving from the northeast use the Seinfeld and Alina arrival procedures, and aircraft from the northwest use the Grinch and Jafar arrival procedures. Aircraft from the southwest use the Pricey and Jokers arrivals, and aircraft from the southeast use the Rides arrival procedure. Arrival aircraft typically will fly along the same paths and at similar altitudes as they do today. For example, the procedures coming from the southwest will allow air traffic controllers to blend the pricey arrivals with the joker arrivals to create a separated single stream of traffic to the runway for landing. This flight procedure board for Orlando Executive Airport is 4 departures. Orlando Executive has 2 runways, and the primary runway for jets is oriented east-west. Orlando International Airport is also shown to the south, bottom of the map, and has 4 runways oriented north-south. There are 2 proposed departure procedures that would be used for jet aircraft departing to the west and east. The west departure procedure is called the tolls, and the east is called the nights. Departing aircraft typically will fly along the same paths and at similar altitudes as they do today. However, air traffic controllers may direct aircraft away from the procedure to avoid hazardous weather, for operational need, or for safety. The radar track data shown are a sample of jet traffic from January to May 2018, which does not include nighttime traffic from 11 p.m. to 6 a.m.
All right, good afternoon. Welcome everyone to our South Central Florida Metroplex workshop, our Q&A session for Orlando this afternoon. I'm Michael O'Hara, the Regional Administrator for the FAA Southern Region, and I'm joined by several technical experts with you this afternoon, including Scott and Bob, who are air traffic controllers from the Orlando International Radar Approach Control, Lisa Favors, an FAA environmental specialist, several others from the FAA, and we also have some airport and airline industry representatives. We also have John with us available to help with any needed Spanish translation. I want to remind everyone we're holding this workshop to answer your questions about the Metroplex project. We're unable to answer questions about other topics during this workshop. You can submit your questions about Metroplex to us to address this afternoon in the Q&A box on Zoom or Facebook or YouTube, or you can text us a question at 949-478-0253. That number again is 949-478-0253. If you need technical assistance during the workshop, please click on the Technical Support tab on our website. And I'd like to turn it over to John for a brief announcement.
Bienvenidos a las preguntas y respuestas del taller para esta tarde. Voy a contar con expertos técnicos que incluyen a Scott y Roberto, controladores de tránsito aéreo del Aeropuerto Internacional de Orlando. Lisa Favors también está con la FAA, va a ayudar con cualquier pregunta que tenga que sea necesaria como recordatorio. Estamos llevando a cabo este taller para responder sus preguntas sobre el proyecto Metroplex. No podemos responder preguntas sobre ningún otro tema. Puede enviar sus preguntas al cuadro de preguntas en Zoom, Facebook y YouTube. O puede probar su pregunta en el número 949-478-0253. Si necesita asistencia técnica, también pueden llamar a ese teléfono. En un sitio de web, si necesitan una pregunta, lo pueden poner en ese sitio para traducción. Esperamos que si tienen una pregunta, los podemos ayudar. Y si necesitan otras instrucciones, pueden usar el teléfono que les dimos. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, John. And again, thanks everybody for joining us. Welcome again. And I'm going to move us through our questions, and I'll go ahead and we'll get started with the first question right off the bat. What is a continuous descent approach? Bob, would you help with that?
Good afternoon, Michael. Yes, certainly I can do that. Thank you for the question. The continuous descent approach is more of a perfect approach that airplanes can fly if there are no restrictions or conflicts as they descend. Metroplex uses what is called an OPD, or an optimized profile descent. These are optimized based on other procedures, current traffic patterns, airspace conflicts, and many other factors when the designs are developed. We can maybe reach out to a couple folks in industry or a pilot input. Maybe Jim or Reagan can maybe answer a little bit more about how we actually develop the OPDs.
Gary, I see. Would you like to share a little bit about OPDs?
We'd be happy to help. The current aircraft, the modern aircraft that we fly, are flown with a flight management computer. It helps the pilot try to determine the exact points that we can make the descents at idle thrust. The software in the airplanes is very, very good in generating a path that we can fly during the descent at idle. And what the design of these procedures do, the stars, the arrivals, they optimize that portion of the software in our airplanes. So what we're saying is an optimized descent is we keep the airplane at idle as much as we possibly can throughout the descent. The computers in the airplane help us as pilots do that. And that's what the goal is for these procedures.
Jim, go ahead. Looks like you have something to add.
And Gary, just a follow-up question. So I know here at Orlando, didn't we connect the standard terminal arrivals of stars with some of the approach procedures too?
We do. There are a few of them that are connected, and that also assists the computer in determining how it can accurately make the descent down to the runway. When they're designed that way, the airplane can actually predict for us with the computer a descent path that we can descend at idle for the majority of the descent. A few of the Orlando arrivals and approaches are constructed that way, and it'll help us as pilots be able to keep the thrust levers or throttles back to idle for a longer period of time.
Thanks, Gary. Thank you, Jim. All right. Our next question, can the airport limit loud aircraft or reduce hours of operation? All right. Judith Ann, would you mind helping with that one?
Certainly, I'd be happy to.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. As a public use airport, Orlando International Airport is prohibited from restricting operations. And the Aviation Authority is mandated by the federal government to allow the airport to operate without restriction 24/7 and 365 days a year. So no, the airport cannot impose restrictions on aircraft hours of operations or on frequency of flights.
All right. Jim?
Okay, and this really gets right to the heart of the issue, I think, for the community, is it's about noise. And, the question I don't think really touches on, what the airport has done. We do have, I think we're going to discuss some of those noise abatement procedures, for the airport itself, but it also doesn't recognize that there's been some generational changes in the aircraft that are flying out of here, and even the impact that COVID-19 will have, in the fleet mix. So there's been a huge improvements in airframe quieting and in engine changes, fleet renewals. But it's probably better if one of the airline reps can speak to that. I think Virginia's got something that she'd like to say about that.
Yes. Hi, Jim. Thank you. No, that is absolutely correct. We have in the last 7 years have invested heavily in upgrading our aircraft fleet. We have some of the quietest aircraft today, including our 787 fleet. We have taken delivery of 500 new aircraft since 2013 and have retired just about the same amount of the older aircrafts, including our MD-80s, which were quite noisy at the time. So this sort of modernization of our fleet, Jim, and is precisely the kind of effort that helps us reduce our noise footprint. So that is one of the ways in which airlines clearly play a critical role as far as upgrading their aircraft. We have aircraft today Our aircraft today, we say, are about 50% quieter than they were about 10 years ago.
Very good. Thanks, Virginia. Lee, did you have something to add? And then I'll come to you, Gary.
Yes, I just wanted to say that even if you have a more modern fleet like we do at JetBlue, there are still things that can be done to help continue to address noise at the source. And one of the things that we're doing is installing vortex generators that help address some of the like a whistling noise that comes off of the engines on our Airbuses. We're about halfway through the installations that we have planned, and even with the COVID downturn and some of the different projects that we've had to put on hold, we're still continuing on that, and we're looking to have that done in the next year or so.
Thanks, Lee. And Gary, back to you. I'm sorry.
No, and if I may add to what Lee has just said, and Jim alluded to COVID and how that has sort of changed our industry completely. Because of COVID, we have had to also reconfigure our aircraft fleet, which has, we have opted to retire our 767 and 757. So it's not only noise, but there are other factors currently at play that have made us look at our entire fleet of aircraft.
Thank you, Virginia. Gary?
Yes, thank you. And you know, for Southwest, it's been a natural progression that I've been able to see for many years that in 2005, that was the last year we flew our noisiest airplane. We retired the 200s and they were gone during that year. And then about 2 years ago, we retired our 300s. So now we're flying next generation aircraft and the newest that Boeing makes. And each progression in that sequence, the airplanes continue to get quieter. We're happy to see what Boeing is doing with that so that we can fly those airplanes. And yes, they're getting much quieter. So the airlines are doing everything we can to be able to progress and reduce the noise as much as possible.
All right, great noise discussion. Anybody else? Looks like we may have covered it. So again, thanks everybody for contributing the different perspectives on that. All right, let me take us to our next question. I live just south of the airport and get a lot of planes over my house. Why can't you just turn them east sooner over the open areas? So that may be a good one. Scott, do you want to help with that?
Yes, I'd be happy to, Michael.
Thanks, Scott.
So the Metroplex procedures on a south departing operation are not changing from what we do today. The aircraft will continue to be turned based on multiple factors: aircraft performance, other traffic, weather, or other safety issues. And so they will continue to turn in various places, but it is not going to be altered by the Metroplex procedures.
All right, Scott. So part of that question talks about a lot of planes today, and I want to take the opportunity to reiterate that none of the Metroplex procedures have been implemented. We're still in the evaluation process of the project. We just issued the draft environmental assessment. We're in the comment period for the public that's open until July 10th, and we don't expect to make a determination on the project until I'd say at least September, sometime this fall. And none of these procedures would be implemented until spring of 2021 at the earliest. So Metroplex is not out there today in the Florida area. I don't know if there's anything else from an air traffic perspective about why they can't turn east sooner, but I guess we've kind of covered the Metroplex piece of that. All right. We have another question here. Why can't the runway 36 RNAV departures be more to the east than proposed? This would keep the community noise exposure about the same as now and not increase it. Moving 3 to 4 degrees east should not impact simultaneous departures. Both runways use the same heading. There is a lot of airspace out there. Even moving 1 degree would be helpful. It can't be that critical. The runway 35s, that would be 35 left and right, have departures at least 5 degrees west of runway heading. So 3 to 4 degrees east of the 36s seems compatible. So let me ask, I know I used some terminology. I read that question the way it came in, but Bob, if you could help kind of translate what we're talking about, east side, west side of the airport, maybe the north departures, and address that. It looks like Jim maybe has something to add already, but let's start with Bob.
Sure, Michael. Thank you. Yeah, I'm listening to the question myself and looking at a little confused about the 35s have 5 degrees west of runway heading. It's they're actually about the same. So the reason why that we have these are laid out this way is the parallels off the west complex and the parallels off the east complex. This allows you to run simultaneous departures in IFR conditions. The traffic coming off the west complex is on a heading that will keep it actually is a track across the earth, which means it will always be on that track that will keep the aircraft east of Conway Road to try to alleviate any type of noise issues west of Conway. Doing that, we're able to run simultaneous departures off the east complex. The aircraft will actually do a instrument departure, which will allow the aircraft to climb at a higher rate and thus reduce noise also.
Okay, thanks, Bob. Jim, did you have anything? I'm not trying to put you on the spot. I wasn't.
No, I could not say it better than that. It's about safety. It's about separating airplanes. And yeah, there's some math involved in that. And that's what these controllers, are all about is, recognizing, what the restrictions are, what the regulations are, and ensuring that they're running a safe operation. So good job, Bob.
So I'm gonna ask for clarification. You can maybe chime in, Bob and/or Jim. But part of the question says even moving 1 degree would be helpful. Our criteria won't allow that with this type of procedure. We can't have converging departures off of Orlando in the North Flow. So it's not that there's more we could do. Our criteria does not allow that. So I don't want to misstate that, but I think it's an important point if I said that correctly.
That would be correct, Michael. You cannot have a converging procedure off the two sets of parallels like that. And so you're absolutely 100% correct in that statement.
Okay, thanks, Bob. Okay, here's a question. Given that there has been a negative community response to the next-gen implementations in other locations nationwide, what is being done differently to address the true noise impacts to people on the ground? For example, different than the 65 DNL alone.
Well, I can give it a shot,
thanks.
Michael.
Okay.
For this particular Metroplex project, the FAA attempted to design these procedures to largely follow what the flight paths are now, or similar to what they are flying now. And, back last year when we came to your areas and did workshops before, I think Michael mentioned earlier, we did 17 workshops before. All of that preliminary work and design and comments that we gathered from the community, we really took it into consideration when we were when our procedure developers were tightening up the project, and wherever feasible, we incorporated some of those things. Now, as a part of this draft environmental document, we're collecting formal comments, and you're welcome to leave a comment. If you feel like we didn't listen to you before, for whatever reason, you can leave a comment again. You can visit that website, Florida Metroplex Florida Metroplex workshops.com, and there you will find a link to leave a comment, as well as you can also learn about what the noise looks like in your area and look at the change in noise from what is currently happening and what's proposed today. At that same website, Florida Metroplex workshops.com, you can click on the noise tool button and it'll bring you to this page. And there you can learn about, our significance thresholds. You mentioned the 65 DNL. That's something, that's a metric that we are bound to use per our NEPA order for noise impacts. And you can learn about that. And you can see what's happening in your area by clicking in the search bar and start typing your address. And some similar addresses will pop up, and you just click on that address, and all of those little blue circles and dots, it'll bring you in closer, and you can click on one of them and learn about what's happening in your area, the proposed the proposed DNL, the current DNL, and what the change looks like. So hopefully, you can learn a little bit more about that, but we really did take your comments into consideration, and again, we try to develop the procedures sticking closely to kind of where they are now, and try not to introduce new noise impacted areas where possible. Thanks, Michael.
Thank you, Lisa. And the noise, pardon me if I'm saying duplicating. I know you mentioned it earlier, but what that noise tool shows is the difference between implementing the procedures that are associated with the Metroplex and taking no action, which basically means flying the procedures the way they exist today. And what we show in the box that's on the screen there is, I know it's small, but you could go look at that tool if you want to in more detail for your community. What you can see there is what the difference would be between what we proposed and taking no action in both 2021, which is the first year the procedures would be implemented, and also in 2026 with the forecast levels of traffic at that point. The project's not projected to increase the level of flights between the proposed action and no action, but that doesn't mean that there can't be more flights, for example, in 2026 either way. So that's what you'll see in the noise analysis, and have an option to see those any changes in noise. And there are some places that it's literally zero, right?
That's right. And I just want to add, you might see small changes, increases and decreases in noise in the area, but again, based on our thresholds of significance and the environmental analysis we completed for this project, it shows that there are no significant impacts of or significant or reportable noise impacts for this entire study area.
Jim, did you have something to add there?
I do, and I think I see a different, or I want to take a different tact than we did just talk about the noise tool and the the analysis. So what did we learn? What do we do different? This project started in 2012. Mm-hmm. Where we conducted the initial study team analysis of what was then a much larger project. So we had actually had enough airports in the project to qualify to be 3 different metroplexes. We had 52 airports. The projected number of procedures for that size of a project was over 200. We had 90 plus SIDS and stars, plus all of the approach procedure work. We were going to build optimized profile descents to connect to all of the new redesigned approach procedures. It was a huge project. In 2000 and the end of 16 into 17 and 18, we reassessed what we were doing with those projects. With that size of a project, we number one, we downsized it. So we went from the 52 airports that were in that project to what we have today, the 21 airports in this particular project. We also limited the number of procedures that we were implementing, and well, obviously, if you limit the number of airports, we change the number of procedures. But beyond that, we limited the number of changes that we were going to make below 10,000 feet. And that was with a specific eye on, limiting those impacts on people on the ground, limiting the perception that we were moving flight tracks around or that we were making large changes. In some places we did make changes below 10,000 feet. We've got departure procedures. So obviously if we have a SID, it's from the ground, and we have some changes there. And we made some safety related changes for, connectivity of the stars to approach procedures and those types of things. But in large part, we limited the size of the project. We limited the number of changes below 10,000 feet. I don't think that that's necessarily based on lessons learned from other projects, but it was what was right for this project.
Thanks, Jim. Great point. And I know we use one other clarification or comment that I'll make is I know we use environmentally accurate terms like significant noise impact. I just want to pause and acknowledge, if you live under the final approach to a major airport, or if you live under the departure path of an airport, we're not saying that you don't hear aircraft noise. What we're saying is this project doesn't change that. So if you're hearing a lot of aircraft noise today, the tool might show a small increase or decrease, but in reality, you probably hear a similar level in the future. So Lisa is talking about no major increase, no major decrease, but it's not a commentary that if you're closer to the airport versus 20 miles away that you're not hearing airplanes. So sometimes when we use a term like significant noise, I just want to acknowledge we understand that there can be some noise concerns around an airport, and that's different than what we're talking about. Okay, so thank you both for that. All right, here's a question. If there are not runway 36 simultaneous departures, what is the wait time of the parallel departure? Based on what has been stated about runway usage, there appears no need for simultaneous departures on the runway 36. Air traffic can probably help clarify that, or there may be others who want to weigh in as well.
I'd be happy to talk about it, Michael, for a moment. So I'm not positive exactly what we're asking here, but the MCO does not depart simultaneously off of runway 36 left and right currently, nor is there plans to do that. Only the simultaneous departures they talk about are between the west complex, which would be the 36, primarily 36 right, and the east complex, which is the runways that are further east of the terminal and the main airport complex. And that, if you're referring to the earlier discussions that were that took place talking about preserving the ability to depart simultaneously, that's what they're talking about. Hopefully that helps clear it up.
All right.
Michael, this graphic is a perfect example. And what the question is referring to is what's the runway use program at Orlando? And I don't know exactly how they use their runways. Typically, you have multiple parallels, you'll land aircraft on outboard runways, you'll depart aircraft on inboard runways. Nothing is 100%. If you have intersecting runways, then you integrate them into the arrival and departure flow. So it's as depicted and as explained, by Bob and by Scott. This normally you would not be departing simultaneously off of either set of the parallels at one time. Right. One complex versus the other.
All right, hopefully that helps get at what the questioner was asking. If not, please feel free to follow up with us. I'm going to move to the next question. What does Orlando International Airport do to help reduce aircraft noise? Judith Ann, that may be one that I could ask you to help with.
Absolutely, Michael, I'm happy to answer that. So I think you would agree that the FAA is solely responsible for the routing of aircraft in the air and on the ground. However, MCO is committed to being a good neighbor to our community, and we have designated engine run-up areas in remote locations on our airport just to keep the noise away from where populated areas are. The authority also previously acquired property for the purpose of noise mitigation, and we have a full-time noise abatement officer on staff who is here to provide information and respond to complaints. And then we also have a community-led aviation noise abatement committee that holds regular public meetings and advocates for noise abatement in the greater Orlando area.
All right, good points, Judith Ann, thank you. And we've actually met with that committee at multiple times through this project as well.
Yes, you did, and thank you very much. We appreciate it.
All right, thank you, Judith Ann. Okay. So there's another question, and this is about a waypoint. So why wasn't MIGS, why wasn't the MIGS intersection further moved south directly over the Orange County Waste Landfill and Stanton Electrical Generating Plant? MIGS takes planes over or near populated neighborhoods of Stony Brook and Avalon Park. Why not move it further south over the 528 corridor and the power plant, which is sparsely populated? We can pull up, I think it would be helpful to have a diagram there because there'll be some people who don't know that area. Bob, are you ready to help with that?
Sure, Mikey. The answer to this one is basically there's procedure criteria which limits the length of the legs and the turn angles to the aircraft, and to move it any further to the south, it would not allow that procedure to be flown. So additionally, the arrivals above and the departures would be impacted also. So realistically, that is, I think from the original design, it's almost 1 mile south of where we actually had it to begin with. And aircraft, when they fly these turns, they actually bend into turns. They'll start the turns prior to those points. So you won't see them fly exactly over those points. They're called flyby points. And so they'll actually be a little bit even south of the red line, which you're looking at right now. The original line was up on the yellow legs, and we have modified it down to the south. And as I said, the actual aircraft will be to the south of that red line, pretty much where you want the aircraft at.
Any other commentary on? I know we've talked about procedures and turns like this in other workshops. Jim, do you have anything to add?
Well, I was going to ask if one of the pilots would, give some insight on how we would fly that turn there at MIGS. Maybe Gary could weigh in, or Heidi, I'm sorry. Heidi, because an NBAA airplane is going to fly the procedure the same way.
I can start if you'd like.
All right, thanks, Gary.
You bet.
And maybe set the stage, Gary. So this is just northeast of the airport, right? So you've just taken off in a north flow and turned east.
Yes. The first goal for us as pilots is first safety. We don't ever get across that line where we consider things even in a little bit of a medium level of safety. We don't do that. The procedures that we fly are built to the maximum capability of the aircraft. So the turn radius that we can make is the way the FAA has designed their criteria to maximize that. And we do. It is built to the maximum capability the airplane can fly in these conditions. And to go a little bit deeper than that, that red line that you see at the waypoint called Yantee, and then it goes to Meigs. What the airplane will do in those turns, and Bob touched on it briefly, is the airplane starts the turn prior to reaching Yantee. And it'll start the turn to join the next leg to Meigs. It will not fly over Yantee. It's called a fly by waypoint. So it'll turn south of that and past that waypoint. And I'm going to estimate probably about 2 to 3/10 of a mile south of Yantee. The turn from Meigs to the next waypoint is a little bit greater. So the airplane will start the turn a little bit earlier before it gets to Meigs to head on to the east of that next waypoint. It'll probably pass about the same distance, 2 to 3/10 of a mile south of that MEGS waypoint as it tries to join that course to the next waypoint. So to cover this again, these procedures, the FAA criteria uses the maximum capability of the airplane, and these are flyover waypoints that the airplane will stay on the south side of each one of those waypoints. Thank you.
Fly by, yeah.
Right, Gary, thank you. I'm just glancing to see if any other comments on that. Okay.
This is Heidi.
Heidi, yes.
Not a lot to add. Gary really nailed it. I mean, we're flying these procedures as they're developed, and it is a flyover waypoint. So we're going to be pretty close flying directly over to that waypoint. But at the same time, we're doing that, again, in the safest, most precise manner. And our equipment on board allows us to be supremely precise. And we're allowing that flight management system to really allow that and utilize the full capability of that flight management system. So Gary's spot on. It's all about predictability, accuracy, and we're able to do that pretty well.
Right. And I know sometimes I mishear things, but those are fly-by waypoints, not flyover waypoints.
All right. Okay, thanks everyone. So we have another question here. What was the airport's role in the Metroplex procedure design? So I don't know, Jim, do you want to touch on that? I can take that if you want.
Michael, I'm happy to talk to it. And this is an FAA project. So the FAA is, fully responsible for the outcome. Mm-hmm. We engage in collaboration with the airport authorities, with our industry partners, with the noise abatement groups in the area. For instance, I know we have what we call ANAC here in the Orlando area, the Noise Abatement Committee. So we take input from many sources to make sure that we have a complete picture of what the concerns are. And we have done that extensively throughout this process. We have an individual who's dedicated to communicating with the airports to make sure that they know what we are doing on a recurring basis. So although we seek their input and we, on things like the noise abatement procedures, making sure that we're attentive to community noise hotspots and that we don't do anything that is going to change the particular aspect of it. But ultimately, it is an FAA project. I think that in this instance, certainly in the Orlando area, we've made maximum effort to take those things into consideration. When we do the post-implementation assessment, because we will monitor these procedures if they are ultimately implemented as they're currently designed. If they're not flying the way that we anticipated that they would, then we would go back in what we call post-implementation, and we would assess whether we need to make some changes to make them fly the way they were intended to fly.
Okay, thanks, Jim. Okay, here's a question. Can aircraft taking off employ any technique safely to mitigate noise? All right.
That one, Michael.
Okay, thanks, Gary.
And I can talk more specifically for Southwest, and that I know that every industry partner, including the NBAA, all of us as pilots try to employ methods to get the airplane away from the ground as quickly as we can. There's two procedures. It's called an NADP1 and NADP2 procedure, and for noise, they're just about equal. But what we have found is that each manufacturer recommends a little bit of different method to fly the airplane to get it away from the ground as quickly as possible to help what we consider mitigate noise. For Southwest, we get the airplane to 3,000 feet above the ground as quickly as we possibly can. Then we make our acceleration. We have to accelerate the airplane to start, reconfiguring the airplane and get it up to the normal speed that we would climb to altitude with. So we do all employ methods to mitigate noise safely as best as we can for each airplane type that we fly.
Right, Gary, thank you. NADP, noise abatement departure procedure, right? I'm trying to help with if I catch an acronym.
That's correct, Michael. There's NADP 1 and NADP 2. One is
Right.
nearer the airport and the other is a further away. But and the point, and great point that Gary made, accelerate the airplane, because it's all dependent on wind, weight, you know, and a variety of flight dynamic factors. But in essence, they need to level off to accelerate before they can continue that climb and have the airplane appropriately configured for it.
Okay. So quick note to the viewers, we're going to continue to take new questions until 4:30, and we'll continue to answer those after that. You can use the Zoom Q&A button, text us, or use the FAA social media platforms to ask a question. I'm going to keep us moving through the set that we already have here. All right, here's a question. My concerns over the last 3+ years are unchanged. I have made hundreds of complaints about the noise from low-flying planes over Longwood as they travel from the Northwest to Orlando. Though far from the airport, we frequently have planes flying as low as 4,000 to 5,500 feet over our homes. We can hear them inside our home despite having double-pane windows, air conditioning running, fans running, TVs playing. From our perspective, there is no known reason for planes to be flying so low, disturbing neighborhoods which are far from the airport, particularly from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., especially when the airspace appears clear. There seems to be no consistency in the descent level of the planes. The new path shows planes at 6,000 feet over our area. Will there be any effort to keep the planes higher? I'm hoping you all can try to keep the planes at a higher altitude so as not to disturb neighbors far from Orlando, particularly during nighttime and early morning hours. Let me ask if, Bob, if you could help with that, and maybe we can show that on a diagram.
Sure, Michael. The person that asked the question, it appears to me that the issues that they're mentioning are with the current flights,
Right.
flight procedures that are in effect today. The future flights that we have with Metroplex will be on the OPD, which will use less power, and they'll be at idle speeds for reduced noise impact to the communities. And as you can see in the boards, they'll be on a more predictable course. And over the Longwood area, that's correct. The aircraft will descend and they will actually be up at 6,000 feet or above on a normal basis. So we anticipate and hope that this alleviates some of the issues that the folks up at Longwood in that area have had and have spoken to us about over the last few years.
Hey, Bob, could I ask kind of a follow-up question on this? Because I know that it sounded like the commenter was asking us, well, to keep airplanes higher. In this particular instance, like keeping airplanes higher on the arrival or in the downwind, what impact does that have on the rest of the procedure? So if we were at 6,000 feet instead of 5,000 feet?
Well, it appears to me that, if we're talking about a south operation, it would be an issue of the airplane actually getting down and landing any higher than the 6,000 feet that we have defined in there. On a north operation, if we're higher, then we have an impact of the aircraft when they start going on the downwind, and their base turn to final would actually be further to the south, and we would start impacting areas that do not have noise today. We would be impacting new areas and bringing new noise to those areas.
That's a great point. Sarah, if you don't mind showing, kind of highlighting where that Harem waypoint is, a little northwest of the airport. So aircraft that are flying south down toward Bryce, I think that's where you're talking about, right, Bob? So aircraft fly that approach and then make a turn in this particular flow and turn back toward the airport. But you'll notice there are other aircraft coming up from the south, and there are historical flight tracks there. So you can't, if you take them higher, that means they have to fly further south, and you run into airspace limitations in that area. You also have flights coming up from the south. So there are limitations in terms of how that's designed and optimized. But as Bob pointed out up front, it can be designed such that the aircraft come in at reduced power, which is going to equate to reduced noise. Dan, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, could we see a picture of the south flow arrivals? Because the area they're talking about is north of Orlando Executive up there next to I-4. But so it'd be a beam of Haram. Anyway, what I think has happened in the past is they've given you, from a pilot's perspective, they'll give you a descent to a certain altitude. And the pilot's goal is to get down, get configured, get safely set up for the approach. And so if they'll give you a certain altitude, you want to go down to it so you can slow down and get all configured. So in this case, maybe next to Lions over there, you'll be trying to get down sooner. Now, if there's a managed, or we talked about an OPD, a managed descent, or such that there's published altitudes, and I think the commenter mentioned that it'd be a little higher, that's fine because the pilot can be assured that that's all math has been done and they can get down safely in a safe amount of time, and they can plan for a little bit better. So I think that's what we're talking about there. And I think sounds like to me that will be helped by maybe about 1,000 feet higher than is being done today.
Great point. Thanks, Dan. Okay, here's a question. Can you send airplanes over industrial areas or more uninhabited areas instead of certain neighborhoods? I don't know, Bob or Scott, do you have some thoughts on, I mean, there's some general thoughts. We don't have a specific area listed there, but.
I can jump in here, Mike. I'll be happy to. I was involved in the design of the projects from the very beginning, the procedures rather. So in some cases, we actually did try to do that. We were asked in several instances after our initial designs to move some waypoints and some routes when we could. Primarily, it's dictated by the criteria that the aircraft require to fly the procedure safely. So if it was a case where we could move the procedure, if it was brought to our attention, we tried to. But the primary goal was always to make it a safe and actually flyable procedure for the industry to be able to utilize.
Right, Scott, thanks. So I think part of the answer to that is not always. You can't always fly over uninhabited areas. But there are efforts that you take, and then there are criteria or procedure design limitations that can impact that. Okay, here's a question. Where can I see the impact of this plan for planes using the Orlando Sanford International Airport? Maybe two parts of that. It could be kind of from an air traffic procedure perspective, and then we might also reference the noise tool if they want to see that perspective as well. Bob, did you have something for this one?
Sure, Michael. And you hit the nail on the head there as far as the looking at the noise tool from that perspective, and then for the procedures as far as coming in and out of Sanford. The MCO procedures have been built to deconflict the traffic coming in and out of Sanford Airport. So these procedures will actually assist the traffic going in and out of Sanford. They'll help out the controllers and help out the pilots as far as going in and out. They are conflicted. There are some of these procedures do service Orlando Sanford also.
Okay, thanks, Bob. And then Lisa, do you think we could maybe pull up the noise tool? Maybe we can get some help showing again.
Sure.
So all of the analysis that's in the noise tool shows all of the historical tracks for the entire project. So it's not like it's just one airport loaded in. So if you go to an area, it's going to see the combined impact. So
That's right.
let me turn it to you, Lisa.
If we can go back, sure, we can go back to that tool. Again, you can find that tool on Florida Metroplex workshops.com. And once you're there, you click on the noise tool button and it brings you to this page. And do we have a do we know how to, do we have an address that can get us to that area? This noise tool shows results across the entire project area, but specifically, let's see, it's around that area. Okay, here's the Orlando area. And it might take a while to load the data. But once you get there, you can certainly search for your area and see the results of what the noise results were. You start typing your address in the search bar, and it'll zoom into your area, and you can click on one of the dark blue or royal blue circles and see the noise results there. And I think Michael mentioned earlier, you can see results from the year the project could be implemented, which is 2021, and the forecasted year 2026. And if we click on one of those dots right there, and you can see that pop up has that, and you can see the change in noise. And it's not saying you know, the noise is not moving, it's not decreasing or you might see small decreases and small increases in the noise, but you know, ultimately our analysis showed that there are no significant or reportable noise impacts across the entire study area.
Okay, great. Thanks, Lisa, and thanks, Bob. So we have a question. We have a question here. Why are so many more flights with constant engine noise coming over my home? I live north of the airport. So again, I'm just going to caveat up front. It's probably not Metroplex because you're talking about something today. But Bob, do you have anything that you can share on that?
Sure, Michael. You're absolutely correct. Again, it's Metroplex. We're not there yet. This project has nothing to do with noise over someone's house at this point in time. It might be because runway 36 right is currently closed for construction work, and they're using more heavily departing on 36 left. So realistically, there's no tie to Metroplex and what's going on today with this question.
Any other thoughts on that? Okay, we'll take the next question here. Will the routes all be within the purple bands that are shown on the graphics or the boards instead of spread out like the existing radar tracks show? Maybe we can show what that looks like, what the question refers to. Jim, do you want to speak to that at least?
I'd like to get it started, but we're definitely going to need a pilot to speak to it too. From a technical perspective, these are designed to what's called to a navigation specification is what it's called. This is RNAV 1 or Area Navigation 1 specification, and that refers to the total system performance. So the system is required to be able to fly within a mile for 95% of the flight, the projected flight. That's a technical issue. The reality is much different than that. And if one of the pilots could speak to what we're likely to see performance-wise out of these.
Yeah, that's correct. One of the things that we can't bridge is safety. There's a lot of weather in Florida, a lot of clouds that could give us a lot of turbulence, and we as pilots won't fly through those. So air traffic helps us avoid that type of situation. So there will be tracks that are well outside of what we're seeing. But when we have a normal scenario flight, that nothing's going on, there will be a larger concentration of flight tracks within those purple bands. But there still will be some that drift outside of those. It's not a perfect world, but there will be more within those, yes.
Michael, if I could jump in just for a minute as well.
Okay, thanks, Scott.
Sure. I'd like to just add that in addition to like what Gary's saying, there's also times of where there may be traffic issues or simply shortcutting the aircraft, you can see on this graphic that the pink dispersal areas kind of show where the aircraft fly today, and we'll sometimes continue to do that. So I would say the majority of the aircraft will follow the procedure, but certainly there are factors that will allow the aircraft to be within that pink area, and it would be primarily within there. You generally wouldn't see aircraft outside of that, although that's not out of the realm of possibility, but I would give it probably, I don't know, maybe like a 90-10 or 95-5 kind of thing.
Right, and that's, you're looking at significantly reduced dispersion of the tracks, more, and we'll say consolidation of the tracks towards those purple areas. But again, it's not perfect. You'll be closer on long straight paths. You'll be further away when we have turns and we're rejoining the path. So that's, they're not going to drill these purple lines all of the time, but they're going to be a lot less dispersed and more concentrated towards those purple lines.
All right, thanks everyone. Just a point of clarification, I hope I didn't miss it, but we mentioned runway construction in the last question, and there's a note here that that's scheduled to reopen in September. So just in case somebody was curious about that, just wanted to share that information. All right, the next question we have, are the descending glide slopes on approach the same for the new system? Also, is the Class B or Class Bravo airspace the same? I'll ask Bob or Scott on that.
I can answer that one.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead and share that slide. The approaches are not changing. The Class B airspace is also staying the same. The project did get some airspace from Daytona Beach to help allow the optimized profile descent, or the OPDs, into MCO on the northeast corner of the airspace. And you really can't see, I don't think there's a cursor you can show, but that will actually assist also for the aircraft coming in to the airport. So there's, answer the question, it is all the same. No difference on the descent on the glide slope, and there is no changes to the Class Bravo airspace.
All right, Bob. Thank you. Okay, there's a question. Can you please share FAA policy and process for employing alternative metrics beyond DNL for Metroplex projects? And will the Metroplex project test fly procedures for airports to measure noise pre and post implementation?
I
Lisa?
can try to help with that,
Okay.
Michael. I can try to help with it. I can speak to part of it at least. In accordance to the 2018 Federal Aviation Administration Reauthorization Act, that's a mouthful, in section 188, I think, the FAA is in the process of evaluating alternative noise metrics to model aviation noise. And I know that's a hot topic, and a lot of people are interested in just that, figuring out a different way to model noise. But at present, our DNL remains the metric that we are required to use, and it's approved by the Federal Interagency Committee on Aviation, and we call that FICON. You might have heard of FICON, as well as US EPA. So, FAA models noise as compared to measuring noise. And I can give you a little, there's a little comparison chart we might be able to pull up. But bottom line is, we feel like the best method is to model noise, because when you're measuring noise, you're looking at one point in time, one aspects in time, and you're grabbing one event, but the model really gives an average of all the events. And there's a nice little graphic that kind of shows what I'm talking about. When you take a noise monitor and put out there and try to capture the noise, you're getting a small snapshot in time of that noise with the monitor. But when we model noise, it's a computer generated software, but it uses receptors all over. Look, it's not this graphic is not for the Florida area. Of course, you can see it's in San Francisco, but it gives a good depiction of modeling versus measuring. And that's why we use a model. And the only approved model that we have to use right now is the DNL modeling. So, the FAA also recently released a report to Congress on this subject, and it's available for anybody to review if they would like to. You can go to FAA.gov and pull up that report to Congress, and it shows exactly all the efforts that are being done in looking at modeling versus measuring. And again, the reason we use it is because we're required to by our regulations right now. And then when that changes, that's when we'll be changing. And let me see the other part of that question.
Jim may address the question about test. Will the procedures be test flown or any comparison of measures?
And Michael, the answer to that is no. We're not going to test fly them to see if they conform to the model. We've got a very robust model, as Lisa has explained, and in a couple of instances where we have gone and assessed post-implementation impact. In fact, it wasn't the FAA that did it. There was one of the airports used noise monitors to assess one of our implementations, and the end result of that, my understanding is that the model is very accurate, and it's very cost prohibitive, by the way, for airports to have extensive noise monitoring systems and to go out and look at that type of thing. And I'll say at this point, that is within the realm of the airport to go and do single event noise monitoring. The FAA doesn't engage in that. One of the other things I like to point out about this question, I think it's a really great question, is that there are a number of provisions in the 2018 Reauthorization Act that deal with noise, with aviation noise specifically. And I'd encourage people to, call it up online and look at that. One of the areas we're required to study, and I don't recall what section it is, it might be 189. Following this is deals with the perception of a change in noise. If we make a change in a procedure, the perception in the change of noise. And, I think we see some of that in the modeling too, is that there's very minimal change, but we know that people are going to be very perceptive when we change a flight track, and they will be attentive to that. Will it actually change the amount of noise that the ear is capable of hearing and really measuring, or is it going to be the perception is everything? So that is also in the 2018 Reauthorization Act.
All right, I'm going to try to keep us moving, not trying to cut you off, Jim. We've got more questions, and it's 4:29. So will this apply to all proposed departures and landings? Quick question for air traffic.
The short answer for there, Michael, is yes, it will.
Okay. And the slightly longer answer is where weather, where it's not impacted by weather, et cetera. But this is what you would intend to use for approaches and departures and landings. All right. There's a question, Lisa. It says, you mentioned noise impact on residential areas and people. Can anyone talk about the impact on wildlife and state and national parks and reserves in the area? What actions are being taken to study that?
Oh, that's a good question. Yes, we did look at that. We looked at all those impacts. The draft EA took into account impacts on wildlife and parks. And if you would like to look at that in the document, it's a huge document, but specifically you can go to section 5.3 in the draft EA, and it talks about the environmental consequences to wildlife. And I think in section 5.9, it addresses the visual impacts. Also, per our policy and guidance, the FAA consults with the State Historic Preservation Office officer to ensure that, you know, we don't have any adverse impacts on cultural or historical resources. And we are in consultation with the National Park Service as well to make sure we are in compliance with all of those laws as well. Thanks,
Great.
Mike.
Great, thanks, Lisa. So those documents are at metroplexenvironmental.com. You click on the Florida Metroplex and you can see the document section. Lisa was referring to section 5, a couple parts of chapter 5. So those are there, and that's the same location that you can find all the documents on the draft environmental assessment. Back on Florida Metroplex workshops.com, there's some summary slides there. All of the graphics, the boards that we've shown tonight are available on that site, floridametroplexworkshops.com. You can see those. You can see the narrated description of the boards, description of the summary of the environmental analysis. So anything that we're showing, you can find in one of those two places. So thanks, Lisa. All right, here's a question. Please explain SIDS and STARS. We've been using acronyms. Scott?
Yep, I'm here. Also, Michael, your audio seems to be having a little bit of a problem.
Okay, thanks.
Sure, it sounds better now. But anyway, just to briefly, the acronym SIDS, SID and STAR, they just mean Standard Instrument Departure and Standard Terminal Arrival. And what those basically are is it's a codified set of instructions for the aircraft to know ahead of time what exactly, what route, what altitude, what position the aircraft will be flying and what speeds they'll be using. And it allows both the controller and the pilot to be aware of what's coming rather than be a surprise to either party.
Okay, thanks, Scott. I hope I'm coming through. Jim, if I break up, you can raise your hand and take over for me. Can you hear me okay?
You're doing okay, just slightly broken sometimes now.
All right. Another question. Can aircraft stay at higher elevations in order to reduce the number of people on the ground affected by loud noises? I am 15 miles from the airport and having planes higher could help. Bob?
Sure. I think we actually touched on this one a little bit earlier, Michael, that about keeping aircraft up higher. So for every 3 miles or for every 1,000 feet an aircraft stays up higher, the aircraft has to actually fly 3 miles further in a downwind before it starts its base turn to the final approach course. And again, that will significantly increase the noise over areas that experience no noise at this point in time. So what we do is we try to minimize that and only run on the effective tracks that we have today, and with the OPDs reducing the amount of power used in the aircraft to when they come down, that makes it quieter without trying to keep the aircraft higher, which would introduce more noise to areas that don't have it.
All right. Great explanation, Bob. Thank you. Okay, we have a question. And we touched on this, I think, but maybe this is more specific. We'll want to pull up one of the boards. How wide of a band will planes fly in from the Banya waypoint into the airport? Please share details from the plane routes coming into the airport from the northeast into the airport.
I don't know how quick we can get to this. I'll talk to it, but if we could get a south arrival board that we can look at exactly where they're talking about. I don't, if it's going to be a few minutes, maybe we could go to one and come back to this, or if it's quick.
I think they're talking about the Seinfeld and Alena arrivals from the Northeast and where the new procedures will be.
Right. And so, okay, so here you can see on this graphic there, I know they specifically asked how wide of a band will the aircraft fly from the Banya waypoint to the airport. It's going to be very similar to what you see there. The colored lines are actually tracks of existing aircraft. I believe it was from last spring or spring of 2018, I believe. But that was actually the dispersion of how the aircraft flew in that general area, and they will continue to do that. After Banya, that's the end of the arrival procedure. So they will, there will be connectivity to the ILS or the instrument landing system, which is how the aircraft actually transition to land at the airport. So there are cases where they'll go direct from Banya to a point on that final approach course, which you can sort of see is illustrated on that easternmost north-south kind of pinkish line. That's aircraft tracks, but it kind of shows you what the final approach course looks like. And then in other cases, if depending on traffic, the aircraft will be vectored by air traffic control and be either closer in or a little bit further out. And you can sort of see that in that kind of bluish area where the flight tracks are kind of dispersed, and that will continue to be the same.
Okay, thanks, Scott.
Scott, could I just ask a quick question while we have this board up?
Absolutely.
It didn't occur to me before. So you've got the aircraft at Iago at 6,000, Banyas at 7, and they're on final to the different runways there. Is there a reason why we have the altitude differences there?
Because we operate simultaneous ILS approaches into Orlando International, the way that the designs stipulate, they're basically nose to nose. So we start with the aircraft being altitude separated until they're established on the final approach course. So that those altitudes are published on the arrival. They haven't transitioned onto the approach yet, onto the ILS. And so they're altitude separated until they are established. And that is part of the rules that allow us to operate aircraft simultaneously on the final approach courses.
Yeah, great safety point, Jim. Thanks for calling that out. It's got a good explanation.
Thank you.
We'll keep going. Are waypoints all about safety? What about fuel savings? Jim?
This is kind of right up my alley too. So, and
I didn't even look at anybody else, to be honest.
Okay, I'll take it. Yes, they are all about safety. The procedures themselves, being coded instrument flight procedures, are about safety. That's the business that we're in. It's the safest air transportation system in the world, and we are making it better with these types of procedures. We hear questions about the fuel savings, and some people have read that initial study team, 2012 study team report, where each procedure has an assessment of what the impact is on fuel burn and an assessment of, well, how much money is that one going to save? And I think the entire project, when it was really big with 52 airports and all of those procedures, was $15 to $20 million of savings. So people gripe at us and say, you're saving money for the airlines, you're not doing anything for me. I can assure you that is not the case. When you look at the de-scoped project that we ended up with, the draft EA shows the impact as being essentially a wash. Overall for the project, I think it was a 0.43 in 21 and a 0.43% increase in fuel use. So essentially a wash, less than 1% overall. I will share that there's a slight benefit to the procedures that are being implemented for Orlando, but it's not huge overall.
So part of what I would say, Jim, agreeing with what you said, is these precise procedures enhance the safety of the national airspace systems. We're talking again about connecting Florida airports with the rest of the NAS, modernizing our airspace, and the waypoints are part of that infrastructure. So they're about safety. A waypoint is a part of a precise path, and You've heard some of the discussion today about flyby and flyover, but a waypoint is a point in airspace and it's a part of the design. Inherently, everything we're talking about comes into effect. So I agree with what you said, Jim. I don't know if anybody else wants to add to that.
There we go.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe we could get a pilot comment on the safety aspects of using OPDs.
Yeah, there's so many safety benefits that we and Scott and Bob and I could talk about it, and so could Dan and Heidi and Lee. But the OPD gives us the opportunity to reduce how many times we talk back and forth on the radio. When designed correctly, these procedures are separated from each other. The arrivals are separated from other arrivals. They're separated from departures. They're separated from satellite airports. And it gives us the ability to be cleared for a procedure and safely fly it in all three dimensions, most of the time down to the runway. What that does is it prevents the controller from having to talk to us additional times. It allows us to concentrate on flying the airplane because we're not answering the radio more often. There are so many benefits, and while fuel conservation, we don't even call it fuel, we call it trying to be carbon neutral or negative. That's what we try to do in everything we do. We tried to be that way because it does have an impact with the world that we live in. Safety is always foremost. It's always in the front of our mind and how we operate. And all the other factors are secondary. So I hope that helps.
Great. Thanks, Gary, for adding on, and thank you, Jim. Okay, we have a question. Was the 65 decibel meant to be a continuous noise level? Lisa, maybe you can help clarify on that.
I can try. The FAA does not use continuous noise levels. We use the average annual day-night, the annual day-night average sound level. And that's what DNL is. It's not a continuous noise level. It's the one single metric that represents aircraft sound over the 24-hour period, including all aviation sound generated during that period. It also has a 10 decibel weighting for nighttime procedures between 10 p.m. and 7 a.m. And that weighting, it helps to account for the greater annoyance of nighttime procedures. So to answer the question, no, we don't use continuous noise levels.
Okay. All right, we're getting close here. Here's a question. We've touched on this, but to avoid convergence on runway 36 departures, why can't 36 right departures, which are the most, be more to the east, while 36 left stays at runway headings? This would help with the noise. Bob, I think you can help with that. I think we need to clarify kind of what we're going on, but we may need to talk east and west complex again.
Yeah, yes, Michael, I agree. We're talking about the West Complex here again. This is not a normal departure configuration. The normal departure configuration with all 4 runways open would be runway 36 right and runway 35 left. 36 left and right sit side by side, and we would not run those aircraft like that. Runway 36 left straight out departures would not normally be used unless that aircraft is coming off the west ramp, either a cargo flight. It's probably one of the least amount of departures, runways that we use for departures coming off of Orlando. So again, we're talking about convergence with traffic. It's FAA rules, and we cannot depart off of runway 36 right and turn into runway 35 left on a converging piece. It's illegal for us to do that. The aircraft coming off of 36 right would be straight out, and the aircraft off of runway 35 left would be turned to the right. That would be the normal configuration. That's what we have set up here. So just to clarify that, we don't use a 3/6 left and right configuration at any time there.
Right. And I don't know if we have time to do it. Sarah, if you wanted to pull up, I actually know it's page 1-36 of chapter 1, but it shows the runway configuration. That might help because I'm guessing not everybody knows all of the runway orientations at Orlando. But as Bob said, there are 2 runways on the west side, there are 2 runways on the east side, and we only depart on one of the wests at a time and one of the easts at a time at the most. And those runways on the west and east can't point at each other. So I think the question we keep coming back to is why can't the 3/6 right departures head toward the east complex? And that's where the criteria issue is. So I don't know if that helps.
That's correct, Michael. We cannot converge off a 3/6 right into runway 35 left.
All right. Great job, Sarah. Thank you. So that the picture that shows the airport twice, by the way. There aren't all those runways, but what this shows, and it's page 1- I already forgot what I said, 1-36, I think, but it shows the Orlando configuration. So that's available in the document, but you can see the west complex here and the east complex and how we typically depart off of 3/6 right and off of 3/5 left, as Bob said. But if anybody wanted the graphic, that's where you can find it. Bob, thanks for help on that and for tolerating me jumping in.
No problem.
All right, we have a question here. Will you please show us the overlay of the old flight paths and the new flight paths? So maybe we can show some examples of that, but we can say where those boards are and kind of explain real quick what the layout of that board looks like, and then we can show where people can find that set. Bob, do you mind, or Scott, kind of just what people are seeing on the board in terms of the future and the historic tracks?
Yeah, I can jump in. Basically, what you're seeing with the more solid, I guess, purple lines, it depends on your computer screen. Those are the condensed tracks where the overlay for the Metroplex flights will be flying. As you look at some of the lighter tracks up there, they almost look like they're almost a greenish color. That is the existing tracks as aircraft fly today. So you have your more purple is where the tracks are going to be at, and the green tracks are what's the existing flight procedures, or where airplanes fly at today. That's how they're overlaid.
All right, Bob, thanks. And then Sarah, one last question. If you go back to FloridaMetroplexWorkshops.com, that's the page that some of you may have come in, but not all of you. If you go to FloridaMetroplexWorkshops.com, we'll show you one more time where you can view these materials after the workshop. So the page that's here, if you click, for example, on poster boards, that will give you the graphics. You can actually see narrated videos that were part of the beginning of the workshop. You can click through those. There's some notes and legends on those, but there are also narrated videos here. If you click on those, they'll zoom in full screen. So we have the narration that are being highlighted there. And this is also where you can find the noise releases demonstrated several times during the workshop today. So I want to make sure people know where to find those if you want to do a little bit more analysis after we end. So in fact, that does actually bring us to the end, and I will start by thanking you all for participating. Everybody who asked us some really good questions today. I hope our answers helped provide some clarity of what this project's about. Again, these procedures have not yet been implemented, so we want you to understand what we're proposing. I want to thank our specialists for providing your expertise and helping to explain what this proposed project means and what the project's about. I want to thank our entire FAA communications team, everyone who helped support this workshop in the background. as well as industry representatives from the airport, the airline, and pilots who joined us this afternoon to contribute your perspectives, really adding to the depth of the discussions we were able to have. So thank you. Thank you for joining us. As a reminder, the questions that we were asked today are not part of the legal record for the draft environmental assessment. If you want to comment for the record, please go to the comments tab on the same website we were just showing, floridametroplexworkshops.com. You can also email us or send us a written comment, and those addresses are also on the comments tab on this website. I'll remind everyone the comment period's open until July 10th of 2020, and after the comment period closes, the FAA will consider and review all the substantive comments received during the comment period. The agency expects to issue an environmental determination in September 2020. This afternoon's workshop is being recorded. It will be available for playback on the same website tomorrow, in the same place you'll already find the recording for this past Monday's Orlando Metroplex workshop. So that officially concludes our workshop today. I want to thank you again for joining us.
Thank you.